In the year 1788, the world was a different place, and Sydney Cove was nothing more than a cluster of tents and basic timber huts. Arthur Phillip stepped onto the shore where the harbour waters met the land, leading a weary population of convicts, marines, and a few hopeful settlers. They were thousands of miles from the familiar comforts of Britain, abandoned to their own devices in a land that offered no easy harvest. This was the convict foothold, a place where survival was measured in days, and every sunrise was a victory over the encroaching silence of the bush. Life in those early years was dictated by the movement of the tank stream, the city's first and most vital source of fresh water. The colony depended entirely on the arrival of supply ships from the mother country, living in a constant state of anxiety and hunger. Around them, the dense, grey-green bushland pressed in from all sides, a physical manifestation of their isolation and their status as outcasts. It was a landscape of hardship, yet in the layout of those first muddy tracks, the blueprint of a future metropolis was being etched into the earth. By the time the calendar reached the middle of the 1900s, the city had undergone a radical metamorphosis, surging past a population of 200,000 residents. The arrival of steam technology reshaped the rhythm of daily life, introducing the roar and hiss of double-decker trams to the winding streets. These noisy machines were the lifelines of a growing society, linking distant suburbs to the pulsing heart of the city center. For the first time, commuting became a reality, allowing the harbour city to spread its wings beyond the original, cramped shorelines of the cove. This era of expansion was fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, as the discovery of gold and the wealth of the wool trade poured capital into the colony. The shoreline of the harbour began to change, as docks and warehouses rose to meet the increasing demand of international commerce. Sydney was no longer a mere outpost. It was becoming a player in a global game of trade and influence. The people who lived there began to look at the water not as a barrier to their escape, but as a gateway to their future prosperity. As the late 1800s approached, Sydney emerged as a true colonial powerhouse, sprawling across both the northern and southern sides of the deep blue harbour. A complex web of railways began to knit the suburbs together, creating a unified urban fabric where once there were only isolated villages. Shipping traffic crowded the waters of Circular Quay, with masts and funnels creating a forest of wood and steel against the sky. The architecture of the era grew increasingly grand, as Victorian stone buildings signaled a deep and growing ambition for permanence. With the talk of federation looming in the air, Sydney positioned itself as a fierce rival to Melbourne for the title of national leadership. Every new bank and every government office was designed to be a statement of power and cultural relevance. The city was shedding its convict skin, replacing it with the fine silks and heavy stones of a sophisticated society. It was a time of intense competition, where the layout of the streets and the height of the towers were used to measure the city's worth against the rest of the world. The construction of landmark buildings like the Sydney Town Hall reflected a rising civic pride that bordered on the defiant. This magnificent structure was born out of controversy, with many citizens questioning the extravagance of its design during times of economic fluctuation. Yet, from an aerial perspective, the city's grid began to reveal a metropolis that was eager to prove itself worthy of imperial grandeur. Church spires reached toward the heavens, and massive warehouses stood like fortresses of trade, all following a logic of growth and order. This was the era of the stone and the steel, where the weight of the buildings was meant to anchor the city to the continent forever. The architects of the time were not just building shelters, they were crafting a narrative of progress and enlightenment. They wanted the world to see that from the ruins of a penal colony, a civilization had risen that could rival the great capitals of Europe. Every carved gargoyle and every marble pillar was a brushstroke in a much larger painting of national identity. George Street became the commercial spine of the city, a vibrant and chaotic artery crowded with shoppers, horse-drawn carts, and elegant carriages. This was where the wealth of the interior, gathered from the vast wool stations and the deep gold mines, was put on display for all to see. Elegant hotels and high-end businesses lined the thoroughfare, transforming Sydney into a confident and bustling Victorian metropolis. The street was a theatre of social status, where the new aristocracy of trade mingled with the working classes in a constant flow of motion. The economy was thriving on the back of primary industries, but the culture was also beginning to find its own unique voice. There was a sense of excitement in the air, a feeling that anything was possible in a city that had grown so much in such a short time. People from all over the world were drawn to George Street, bringing with them new ideas and a hunger for a better life. It was here that the heart of Sydney beat the loudest, fueled by the energy of 1,000 different dreams and the steady rhythm of commerce. During the late 1900s, a unique architectural movement emerged as a response to the perceived moral failings of the city's rapid growth. Coffee palaces rose as symbols of the temperance movement, using grand design as a form of moral persuasion against the perceived evils of alcohol. These buildings were intended to be refined spaces where the public could gather without the influence of the pub, reflecting a belief that architecture could reshape the soul of society. Though many of these grand establishments eventually failed financially, they remain a fascinating chapter in the city's psychological history. They embodied a monumental idealism, a hope that the physical environment could dictate the behavior of the masses. The intricate facades and luxurious interiors were meant to provide a sophisticated alternative to the rough-and-tumble nature of early colonial life. Even in their eventual decline, these coffee palaces stood as a reminder of a city trying to reconcile its rough past with a more polished future. They were the physical evidence of a society grappling with its own identity and its vision of what a civilized life should look like. When the Queen Victoria building was completed, it replaced the old, chaotic markets with a monumental shopping palace that redefined urban elegance. Despite the economic hardships that gripped the colony during its construction, the building's vast central dome and ornate interiors were a triumph of civic art. It was a place where everyday commerce was elevated to something sacred, a cathedral of consumption that celebrated the height of British craftsmanship. The building was a gift to the city, intended to honor the long reign of the Queen and the stability she represented. Walking through its corridors was like stepping into a different world, far removed from the dusty streets and the grime of the harbor. The stained glass and the intricate tile work created an atmosphere of timeless beauty, a stark contrast to the rapidly changing world outside. It proved that even in a young colony, there was a deep desire for beauty and a commitment to creating something that would last for generations. The Queen Victoria building remains one of the most beloved landmarks in the city, a testament to the enduring power of visionary architecture.
Look at the speed of it! The steamer can't keep up!
As the new century dawned, electric trams began to replace the old steam-powered models, carrying hundreds of millions of passengers through the streets each year. This technological shift redefined how the city functioned, enabling a massive suburban explosion that pushed the boundaries of Sydney further into the landscape. Central Station became the anchor of a rapidly expanding transport network, a grand gateway that connected the heart of the city to the growing residential fringes. The ease of movement changed the social geography of the city, making the dream of home ownership a reality for more people. This was a time of incredible motion and energy as the city embraced the future with open arms. The suburbs were no longer distant outposts, but integral parts of a vast urban machine that worked in harmony. The sound of the electric tram became the soundtrack of the modern era, a constant reminder of the city's relentless drive toward efficiency and growth. It was during these years that the modern footprint of Sydney was truly established, setting the stage for the global city it would eventually become.
Another day closer to connecting
Following the
city.
end of the Great War, Sydney entered a more reflective and somber era, carrying the heavy weight of national loss and a new global awareness. The 1920s saw the appearance of the automobile alongside the trams, a sign that the pace of life was continuing to accelerate even as the city mourned. Older Victorian buildings began to feel dated, relics of a colonial past that the city was eager to move beyond. There was a sense that the world had changed forever, and Sydney needed to find a new way to express its identity in a post-war landscape. The grief of the war was etched into the faces of the people and the monuments that began to appear in the city's parks and squares. Yet, amidst the sadness, there was also a sense of pride in the role that Australia had played on the world stage. Sydney was no longer just a colonial capital. It was the primary city of a young nation that had been baptized in fire. This period of transition was marked by a search for modern meaning, as the city began to look toward the future with a mixture of caution and hope. The completion of the Sydney Harbour Bridge in 1932 physically and symbolically united the northern and southern halves of the city. This massive undertaking was more than just a piece of infrastructure. It was an engineering icon that redefined the scale of human ambition in Australia. The bridge transformed the northern suburbs overnight, turning quiet residential areas into thriving parts of the metropolitan core. It was a triumph of the human spirit during the depths of the Great Depression, providing work for thousands and a sense of hope for millions. The coat hanger, as it came to be known, became an instant symbol of the city's resilience and its ability to conquer the challenges of the natural world. From its highest point, one could see the entire expanse of the harbour, a view that reminded everyone of the city's unique relationship with the water. The bridge was a bridge to the future, a steel statement of permanence that promised a more connected and prosperous tomorrow. It remains the most recognizable silhouette in the country, a masterpiece of form and function that still commands respect.
These sail-like shell designs, they cannot be measured with a straight ruler. They are
From the air, it is easy to see how the harbour has dictated the very form of Sydney, with the suburbs following the jagged edges of the water like a liquid puzzle. The city centre tightens its grip around Circular Quay, the historic point of contact between the old world and the new. As the mid-1900s progressed, the city was preparing for its next defining symbol, a structure that would move beyond the practical and into the realm of the extraordinary. The landscape was being primed for something radical, something that would change the way the world viewed Australia forever. This was a period of consolidation, where the city grew into its skin and began to appreciate the unique beauty of its geography. The harbour was no longer just a place of work, but a place of leisure and inspiration. The relationship between the people and the water deepened, as the city's identity became inseparable from the blue expanses that wound through its heart. Sydney was waiting for a spark, a creative explosion that would propel it into the cultural consciousness of the entire planet. Rising from the historic ground of Bennelong Point, the Sydney Opera House introduced a radical design that challenged every known principle of engineering. Its construction was marked by unprecedented difficulties, political scandals, and a budget that spiraled far beyond the original estimates. Yet, despite the controversy and the years of delays, the vision of John Utzon began to take shape against the backdrop of the harbour. It was a shift from the colonial ambition of the past to a new global cultural identity that prioritized art and imagination.
Dynamic global city we know today.
Water sounds eternal.
The Opera House was not just a building for music. It was a sculpture of the sea, a manifestation of the wind and the sails. When it was finally opened in 1973, it silenced the critics and captured the imagination of the world. It signaled that Sydney had arrived as a sophisticated global player, a city that was brave enough to embrace the avant-garde. The structure remains a miracle of the modern age, a reminder that the greatest achievements often come from the greatest struggles. With the heavy strength of the harbour bridge behind it and the ethereal grace of the Opera House ahead, Sydney stands transformed as a city of two icons. It is no longer a distant outpost of a dying empire, but a vibrant metropolis shaped by the constant reinvention of itself through engineering and art. The story of Sydney teaches us that origins do not dictate our destiny, and that even the most fragile experiment can become a giant if it is nurtured by ambition and courage. Looking back on this journey, we can see that the history of a city is really the history of the human will to build something lasting in a temporary world. We must learn to value the foundations laid by those who came before us, while remaining brave enough to build something entirely new. What defining symbol are you building in your own life? And what legacy will you leave for the generations that follow? I wish you all great health and a spirit of endless curiosity as you navigate your own harbor of life. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel to continue exploring the stories that define our world together.